Hello, perceptive Scorpio. Something is shifting beneath the surface of your relationship with money, value, and security. And August 21 and 22 may bring a moment when what you have sensed privately becomes much harder to ignore. This is less about predicting a sudden windfall and more about recognizing a change that has been quietly gathering within you, perhaps before you even had words for it. You may have noticed repeating numbers, an unexpected feeling, a thought that keeps returning, or a quiet inner pull towards something you once hesitated to pursue. Whatever first made you pause and pay attention, let yourself notice it without forcing an answer. This is not simply about looking for a financial prediction. It is an invitation to explore where your inner transformation and your material life are beginning to meet. Scorpio, you understand that the most important changes rarely happen on the surface, and sometimes what looks still from the outside is already moving underneath, like deep water shifting beneath an otherwise quiet shoreline. As August 21 and 22 approach, the question is not whether something is guaranteed to arrive, but whether you are willing to see what is already changing in the way you value yourself. This is where the deeper work begins. You may be confronting an old belief about security, a financial choice you have delayed, or a pattern of holding tightly to what once helped you feel safe. Protection can serve us for a season, but there comes a point when the same armor that kept us standing can make it difficult to receive anything new. So ask yourself gently, can you allow an opportunity to enter your life without needing to control every condition around it? Can you recognize your own value without waiting for money, approval, or certainty to prove it first? The days ahead can become a concentrated space for that kind of awareness. Pay attention to the ordinary things that carry unexpected weight: a conversation, an email, an offer, an idea that returns after you thought you had dismissed it, or a decision that suddenly feels different when you look at it from a more honest place. Not every sign needs to become a prophecy, and not every coincidence needs an explanation. Sometimes their value is simply that they make you stop long enough to hear yourself clearly. What matters is how you respond when something real asks you to move differently. And Scorpio, you are not being asked to force a breakthrough. You are being invited to release the version of security that depends entirely on control and make room for a more grounded kind of trust. The opportunity may be tangible, but the transformation begins much earlier, in the moment you realize that receiving does not require you to abandon your discernment, and trusting yourself does not mean having every answer in advance. It means recognizing when something has changed within you and allowing that change to shape what you choose next. There is a quiet intelligence in the way change gathers beneath the surface, often invisible until several pieces of your life begin making sense at once. Around August 21 and 22, Scorpio, this moment can be approached as a concentrated space for noticing what has been shifting within you. Your financial story may be reflecting something deeper than money itself, a changing relationship with security, self-worth, trust, and the parts of yourself you once felt you had to protect. Rather than asking what is guaranteed to arrive, this period invites you to notice what you are finally ready to see. For you, Scorpio, the most meaningful changes often begin where nobody else can see them. There may be something you have carried quietly for a long time, a belief about scarcity, control, or what you must accomplish before you are allowed to feel secure. As you move through this period, that old belief may become easier to recognize, not because it suddenly disappears, but because you are beginning to understand why you held on to it in the first place. And once you can see the pattern clearly, you have more freedom to choose what comes next. This is where the symbolism of transformation becomes especially meaningful. Scorpio is not simply being asked to reach for more. You are being invited to reconsider what security actually means when it is no longer built entirely around control. What part of you has been afraid to claim the life you genuinely want, because claiming it would require you to trust yourself in a new way? Perhaps you have watched opportunities pass while waiting for certainty, or kept your plans private because protecting them felt safer than risking disappointment. The deeper invitation here is to release the belief that you must know every outcome before you can take the next step. Your relationship with value may be changing, and that includes the way you value your time, your work, your boundaries, your ideas, and the choices you make with your resources. Instead of shrinking your expectations to fit an old version of yourself, you may begin asking whether your current decisions still reflect who you are becoming. This is where self-worth can meet opportunity, not as a promise of instant wealth, but as a willingness to recognize what deserves your attention. As this window unfolds around August 21 and 22nd, communication may become especially meaningful in the story. A conversation could bring clarity, an old contact could reappear, an email could place an idea back in front of you, or an opportunity you once dismissed could suddenly look different because you are no longer standing in the same emotional place. These moments do not need to be treated as supernatural proof. Their value may simply be that they reveal something you were previously unable or unwilling to notice. Sometimes the smallest interruption in an ordinary day can expose a door that was already there. And this is where your Scorpio nature can be invited into discernment rather than suspicion. You do not have to treat every coincidence as a message, and you do not have to analyze every feeling until it loses its meaning. Instead, pay attention to what consistently pulls at your awareness, especially when the same question, possibility, or decision keeps returning from different directions. The more honestly you observe, the easier it becomes to distinguish between fear asking you to retreat and intuition asking you to look closer. There may also be an opportunity connected to something you thought had already been settled. Perhaps an old financial matter begins moving again, a professional possibility returns in a different form, or an idea you once rejected becomes worth reconsidering because your circumstances have changed. The important point is not to assume that every returning opportunity is meant for you. It is to recognize that readiness changes the way you evaluate what is placed in front of you. And sometimes the person who was not ready before is no longer the person making the decision now. You may feel uncertain as this unfolds, and that does not mean you are moving in the wrong direction. Transformation rarely arrives as a dramatic announcement. More often, it begins as a quiet realization that something you once tolerated no longer fits the life you are trying to build. Your daily choices become part of that process. How you respond to an unexpected message, whether you revisit a decision you have avoided, whether you allow yourself to ask for what your work is worth, and whether you can say yes without needing complete control of what happens afterward. This is where participation matters more than perfection. You do not need to force an outcome, chase money, or convince yourself that every event is a hidden meaning. You are being asked to remain present enough to recognize the difference between an opportunity that supports your values and one that simply triggers an old desire for certainty. Sometimes the most important shift is a decision made calmly, without fear rushing ahead of you, because that decision reveals that your relationship with yourself has already begun to change. There is something powerful about the ordinary nature of these moments. A financial opening may not look dramatic when it first appears. It could arrive through a practical conversation, a revised proposal, a delayed response, a new idea, or a small possibility that requires patience before its value becomes obvious. You do not need thunder to know that something matters. Sometimes the familiar landscape changes because you are finally seeing it with different eyes, and what once looked insignificant begins to carry a different weight. That is where the tarot sequence of the Ten of Pentacles, Judgment, and the Ace of Pentacles becomes meaningful for this Scorpio story. Taken symbolically, these cards do more than suggest financial gain. Together, they can describe a movement from inherited ideas about security through a moment of personal reckoning toward a tangible beginning that asks you to build differently. The Ten of Pentacles asks what kind of stability you actually want to create and what patterns of value you may have inherited without questioning them. Then comes Judgment, carrying the deeper question of what truth you can no longer keep postponing. It does not need to be interpreted as punishment or pressure. Instead, it can represent the moment when you hear yourself clearly enough to stop negotiating with what you already know. What decision, responsibility, or possibility has continued returning because some part of you understands that it deserves your attention. For Scorpio, this can become less about dramatic transformation and more about the quiet courage to stop protecting an identity that has already outlived its purpose. And then the Ace of Pentacles offers something tangible, not an entire harvest, but a beginning you can actually work with. It may symbolize a new financial possibility, a practical opportunity, a project, a client, a career direction, or simply a decision that gives your future somewhere solid to take root. The point is not that money suddenly appears because you believed hard enough. The deeper message is that when self-trust, discernment, and willingness begin meeting the practical world, even a small opening can become meaningful. So as you approach August 21 and 22, let your attention move inward before you rush outward. Notice what you are still holding because it once made you feel safe, and notice what you may now be ready to release because it keeps you living inside an older version of your life. This is not only a question of what you might receive, it is a question of what you are prepared to build once you stop confusing control with security. The opportunity matters because it gives you a chance to practice a different way of choosing, one rooted less in fear and more in the quiet certainty that you can trust yourself when the next door opens. The Ten of Pentacles speaks of more than money. It speaks of what endures, family patterns, inherited ideas about security, the stability you were taught to protect, and the legacy you may eventually choose to reshape. For you, Scorpio, this card asks what you have inherited emotionally or materially, and which parts are truly worth carrying forward. Is there a belief about success, safety, or worth that has quietly shaped the way you hold on to what you have? For many Scorpio souls, this is less about a dramatic windfall and more about recognizing something buried beneath old fears, survival patterns, or an identity you have begun to outgrow. Your desire for abundance may be connected to a deeper desire to feel secure without remaining guarded all the time. The Ten of Pentacles reminds you that wealth is not simply currency, it is the structure of a life, and you may be ready to build that structure from a truth that belongs to you. Then comes judgment, asking you to listen closely to what you already know. Judgment does not arrive to criticize you. It calls something buried back into consciousness, especially when you've been circling a decision, idea, or truth, because acting on it would require you to become someone slightly different. You may have been waiting for certainty or stronger evidence, but judgment asks, what have you postponed because moving forward would mean releasing the version of yourself that learned to survive through control? What opportunity, conversation, offer, or decision keeps returning quietly, not as pressure, but as something you know deserves another look? This is where readiness becomes less about feeling fearless and more about responding differently. Then the Ace of Pentacles appears, not as fantasy, but as something tangible enough to build upon. It can represent a work opportunity, client, financial opening, practical offer, or decision that gives you something real to work with. The seed may look modest at first, but what matters is whether you recognize its potential and choose to cultivate it differently this time. That is the quieter power of August 21 and 22. The people who recognize meaningful opportunities are not always the loudest or most confident. Often, they are the ones who notice what seems small but carries real weight. One thoughtful email, honest conversation, application, or decision to revisit an old possibility can become significant when fear no longer makes every decision for you. Sometimes the turning point is simply realizing you no longer need to protect yourself from every possibility because the past taught you to expect disappointment. If this reading resonates, remember that this is not about proving you deserve something good. You do not need to earn your worth through exhaustion, control, or constant vigilance. The deeper work is positioning yourself emotionally and practically so that when something valuable appears, you can recognize it without immediately questioning whether you are safe, ready, or deserving enough to accept it. This sequence of cards is less a promise than an invitation. Notice what is changing, release what has become restrictive, and make room for a different relationship with security and possibility. So don't only look at your bank account or external circumstances. Look at your perspective, commitments, boundaries, and assumptions about what security means to you. What wants to grow cannot take root in soil you constantly disturb out of fear, and preparation can be quieter than action, changing how you speak to yourself, stopping an old pattern, or trusting your discernment a little more. As August 21 and 22 draw your attention to what is shifting, notice what you are ready to build once you stop carrying what was never meant to remain yours. For Scorpio, whose strength often comes from seeing beneath the surface, preparation is not about doing more, pushing harder, or proving yourself. It is about becoming honest about what you are still holding on to, especially fears and protective habits that once kept you safe but may now limit how freely you respond to opportunity. You don't have to chase what is meant to develop. You need to recognize what deserves your attention and move toward it with discernment. Even color can become a quiet psychological cue, reminding you of the internal state you are choosing. Deep burgundy can represent grounded power without performance, reminding you that you do not have to announce your worth for it to be real. Charcoal carries stillness and discernment, creating space between emotional reaction and deliberate choice, while deep crimson can symbolize life returning after something old has been released. These colors are not promises of a particular outcome. They simply give your subconscious a visible reminder. I am allowed to change, and I can trust myself through the change. Then notice the signs appearing in ordinary life. Have you been encountering a particular image, phrase, place, or symbol repeatedly when your mind is already turning toward money, work, or security? Rather than assuming every repetition is a supernatural message, let those moments invite you to notice your own inner response. What matters is not the symbol itself, but what it reveals about where your attention keeps returning, because awareness can uncover patterns that analysis alone might miss. Preparation is not passive waiting. It is clearing emotional and practical space, deciding what no longer reflects your values, and becoming willing to say yes when an opportunity genuinely fits the life you are building. That can mean reviewing your finances, returning to an idea you abandoned too quickly, reconsidering a goal that still matters, or admitting that a choice has been driven more by fear than wisdom. These actions may look ordinary, but they carry weight because they show that your future is shaped through decisions you can make today. I've watched people change the direction of their financial lives, not simply by working harder, but by stopping old survival patterns from making every decision for them. They stopped waiting to feel completely safe before moving and began choosing themselves with greater honesty. I remember someone I once guided who began each morning with a simple reminder: I can receive without losing myself. She wasn't trying to force an outcome. She was practicing a different relationship with uncertainty, where trust did not require surrendering discernment. Eventually, an overdue financial matter moved forward, but the deeper change had already happened in the way she responded to possibility. So take inventory, not only of your tasks, but of your reactions. What keeps drawing your attention? What are you protecting that may no longer need protection? What decision have you delayed because you sense it might confirm a truth you are not ready to face? Let those questions stay with you as August 21 and 22 approach, not as a deadline, but as a concentrated moment for noticing what has been developing beneath the surface. Sometimes the most important shifts do not arrive with dramatic announcements. They begin quietly, with one honest realization that changes how you see yourself. That is what this preparation is really about. It is not about forcing a miracle or controlling what comes next, but about making enough inner space to recognize what is asking for your attention and meet it with an open heart, clear boundaries, and deeper trust in yourself. When you write something by hand, especially a statement such as, "I am ready to receive what honors my value," you are doing more than putting words onto paper. The physical act slows the mind, steadies your attention, and gives an internal decision somewhere tangible to land. For you, Scorpio, that matters because transformation becomes real when something that once lived beneath the surface is brought into conscious awareness and given a new place in your life. Writing the words is not about forcing reality to change. It is about allowing your mind and body to become familiar with a different possibility. That is why the paper itself can become meaningful. You might place it inside a drawer, a journal, a small box, or another private space that feels intentional, creating a quiet reminder of what you have chosen to make room for. The container does not create the outcome. Its value is symbolic because it gives your intention somewhere to live instead of allowing it to disappear when the day becomes busy. In that sense, manifestation is less about asking for something you have no connection to and more about preparing yourself to recognize, protect, and responsibly develop what belongs within the life you are building. I've seen people experience unexpected shifts after making small changes in the way they approach possibility. One person I worked with, initially skeptical of rituals, wrote down a simple intention and kept it somewhere private because she wanted to stop dismissing what she truly wanted. Later, an opportunity connected to work and finances returned through a channel she had assumed was closed, and what mattered most was that she was emotionally prepared to respond instead of retreating into doubt. She had not controlled the outcome. She had simply created enough room to recognize it. This is where intention becomes meaningful through action. Once you have clarified what you are willing to receive, take one practical step that reflects that decision, whether it means sending the message you've postponed, revisiting an application, returning to an abandoned idea, or contacting someone you avoided because pride or uncertainty made the distance easier. These actions do not require complete fearlessness or every detail figured out. They ask you to show up differently, like someone who understands that trust and discernment can exist together. I often remind people that the doorway does not open because you have become a flawless version of yourself. It opens symbolically when you become willing to stop protecting an outdated version of yourself simply because it feels familiar. For Scorpio, that willingness can be significant. You may know what needs to be released long before you are comfortable admitting it, and sometimes the next step begins when you choose movement over another round of internal resistance. The signs may not always be obvious, but your response can still be intentional. Think about the unexpected breakthroughs people experience: a debt finally resolved, an offer arriving after a long silence, a professional opportunity appearing through an overlooked connection, or a practical solution emerging where none seemed possible. The important part is not assuming that every hopeful action produces a guaranteed reward. It is recognizing that meaningful change often requires preparation, followed by participation. So as August 21 and 22 come into focus, place your hand over your heart and return to your affirmation: I am ready to receive what honors my value. Say it as a conscious commitment, not as a demand for proof, and let your actions carry the same message. You do not need to force open some mystical gate. You need to notice where you have been keeping yourself behind one, perhaps through fear, excessive control, or the belief that you must understand everything before you can move. Receiving is not only an idea held in the mind. Your body participates through breath, tension, posture, attention, and the sense of safety you allow yourself to experience when something unfamiliar begins changing your circumstances. As you move through the focused energy of August 21 and 22, your body is not separate from the transformation you are considering. It can become a quiet partner in learning how to receive without immediately reaching for control, how to pause without shutting down, and how to recognize an opening without demanding certainty first. The deeper invitation is not simply to call something toward you, but to become someone who can meet what arrives with awareness, boundaries, courage, and enough inner space for the next part of the story to take shape. For Scorpio, preparation is not about doing more, pushing harder, or controlling every variable around you. It begins with becoming present enough to notice what your body and emotions have been telling you beneath all the noise. When you are exhausted, overstimulated, or constantly anticipating what could go wrong, even a genuine opportunity can be difficult to recognize because your attention is busy protecting you from uncertainty. But when you slow down and breathe more deeply, you begin to distinguish intuition from fear and reaction from discernment. That is why simple acts of grounding can matter so much during this period. Take a quiet walk, step outside before making an important decision. Put your phone away for a while, or give yourself a few uninterrupted minutes to hear your own thoughts clearly. These are not magical tricks or guarantees. They are ways of reminding yourself, I am here, I am paying attention, I do not have to respond from fear. When your feet meet the earth and your attention returns to the world around you, details that constant urgency made invisible can become easier to notice. This becomes especially important around August 21 and 22, when the story is less about chasing a financial result and more about recognizing what deserves your attention. If you are always rushing, you can overlook an email worth reconsidering, dismiss a conversation carrying useful information, or walk away from an opportunity because it arrived in an unexpected form. Slowing down is not the same as standing still. Sometimes it is the most practical form of preparation because it gives you enough clarity to choose instead of simply react. Emotionally, this period also asks you to examine your boundaries. Scorpio understands privacy and self-protection, but there is a difference between healthy boundaries and walls so high that nothing supportive can reach you. You may need to say no to something that repeatedly drains you, or finally have a conversation you postponed because revealing what you feel seems too vulnerable. You can be compassionate without abandoning yourself, and you can remain private without becoming unreachable. Protecting your energy does not have to mean closing your heart. Sometimes it means deciding carefully what deserves access to it. And do not underestimate what happens when you allow yourself to be supported. Reaching out to someone you trust, accepting help without immediately feeling indebted, or admitting that you do not have every answer can challenge the belief that strength means carrying everything alone. These small choices can change the way your whole system experiences receiving. Vulnerability does not make you weaker, and prosperity does not have to be separated from connection, trust, or emotional honesty. I once worked with someone who stopped trying to create an elaborate ritual and instead spent a few quiet minutes each morning acknowledging what was already working in her life. She took walks, became more honest about her limits, and started responding to opportunities without demanding absolute certainty first. Eventually, a financial development appeared that she could not have predicted through logic alone. But the important transformation had begun earlier, in the way she learned to meet uncertainty without retreating. She did not chase every possibility, she became more discerning about which ones were worth answering. So if you are wondering whether you have prepared enough, let this be your reminder. You do not have to force yourself into readiness. You do not have to become fearless, perfectly healed, or completely certain before taking the next step. You simply need to remain present enough to recognize what your life is showing you, because every honest boundary, clear breath, and thoughtful decision is changing the ground beneath you in ways you may not immediately see. Around August 21 and 22, pay attention to that shift, not as proof that something must happen, but as an opportunity to notice how differently you are beginning to respond. You have already been changing through the moments when you chose patience over reaction, truth over avoidance, and self-trust over the need to control every outcome. What once felt buried may be becoming visible, and what once required protection may no longer need to define you. This is not simply a time to hope that your circumstances change. It is an invitation to embody the person who can meet change without abandoning themselves. You are no longer required to wait for someone else to validate your value, grant permission, or provide a sign louder than your own inner knowing. Even if your decision was quiet, your confidence incomplete, or the first movement came during a private moment when no one else knew what was changing inside you, it still mattered. So ask yourself, what would shift if you trusted that you were already capable of meeting what comes next? How would you move through your day if you no longer needed to control every outcome before allowing yourself to participate? What would you say yes to, and what would you finally release because it belongs to an older version of you? How would you speak, choose, work, spend, and relate to others if you understood that security is not something you have to build entirely through control? What would change if you allowed abundance to become less about possessing more and more about creating a life that actually feels worthy of what you have learned? Let this moment be more than something you listen to and leave behind. Let it become a quiet threshold between the person who kept waiting for certainty and the person who can take one honest step without needing to see the entire path. You do not have to know every turn ahead. You do not have to understand the whole transformation before you begin living differently. You only need enough trust to recognize the next step, enough discernment to know which direction feels true, and enough courage to take it when the ground beneath you begins to shift. And you have already taken that first step simply by being willing to look within. So take a slow breath with me. Place your hand over your heart and let yourself name what you are ready for. You can say it aloud or write it in the comments. I am ready to receive what honors my value with wisdom, discernment, and trust. Let those words become more than an affirmation. Let them remind you that receiving does not require abandoning your boundaries or surrendering your ability to choose. When you speak something honestly, you give it shape inside yourself. And when others share their intentions, that sense of possibility becomes something you experience together. Let August 21 and 22 be a moment you use to become more conscious of what is changing within you, rather than waiting for an outside event to prove that the change is real. If this message stirred something honest in you, gave you hope, or helped you recognize a pattern you are ready to leave behind, you are welcome to support this growing space by liking the video, subscribing, or sharing it with someone who may need a thoughtful reminder that transformation can begin quietly. Every interaction helps this community continue creating space for reflection, astrology, and meaningful growth. And if you choose to stay connected, let these readings be less about predicting every detail of your future and more about helping you listen to the parts of yourself that deserve attention. Scorpio, you do not have to be told that something is changing before you can feel it. You have been sensing the shift beneath the surface, and now you are being invited to meet it with greater trust, clearer boundaries, and a willingness to let an older version of security fall away. You are ready not because every answer's appeared, but because you are learning that uncertainty does not have to control your choices. You are ready to receive, ready to rebuild, and ready to recognize opportunity without chasing it or forcing it into existence. What comes next does not need to be guaranteed in order to matter. Sometimes the most important shift is realizing that you no longer need to hold yourself back simply because the path ahead cannot yet be seen in full. The next chapter begins with that quiet decision, and you are already standing close enough to it to feel the ground beginning to change.